Hello my friends, you probably remember as we go into episode 11 that Gus and Belinda were going to visit Duncan's grave. That's what this episode is about. As soon as they had eaten and built up the fire, Belle followed Gus from the tents, through the thick undergrowth, along the pathway away from the tents to the place of their first camp. Gus remarked that it was as well they had moved because the ground was very damp in this region now. There was a really strong smell as well, and the ground sunk with a squelching sound underneath their feet in places. Gus had not given a great deal of thought to the problem of flooding, but he guessed it was a possibility, and he was thinking now about yet another hazard that they might have to face. As they moved away from the camp toward the crash scene and close to where Gus had first collected water, Gus turned along the top of the ridge to the right. Belle touched his arm and he stopped. She pointed, and a snake about 8 feet long and probably 10 inches in diameter lowered its head from a branch and flicked its tongue about 20 yards from Gus. He froze. She could see he was afraid. He was more afraid than he'd been since the crash. Belle, on the other hand, watched the green and black creature with a naturalist's curiosity. It had a black diamond on its head and occasional black hoops around its body. But it was a rather dirty green and would have been very hard to spot in the branches. Belle felt Gus's fear through his arm. And when she captured a mental picture of the creature, she stamped her foot a few times on the branch at her feet. The snake, still flicking its tongue in and out, moved off of the tree, and they watched it go off into the undergrowth. Gus stood absolutely still. Belle said, "It's okay, Gus, he's gone." It was strange to see this change in Gus. "You know, Belle, there is just one thing that really scares me even more than plane crashes." He was still frozen to the spot, and the sweat was dripping from him, and it wasn't just the heat, it was perspiration from terror. "Are you sure it has gone?" "Positive. Most snakes are happy enough to glide away. I didn't know what kind it was. It probably isn't poisonous." "It's not whether it's poisonous or not. In England I've in the past seen grass snakes and adders, and both of them frightened me. They frightened me more than tanks, machine guns and war." He looked at Belle's smile. "It's irrational, I know, but they terrify me." "It's okay, Gus. My mother's like that with spiders. And my best friend at school in Belfast was terrified of clouds." "Clouds?" "Yes, clouds. We do not understand our fears, but we cannot ignore them. Sometimes they can take control of us. Are you okay to go on?" "Yes. I'm glad you saw him though. If I'd been any closer..." Gus shuddered. Belle squeezed his arm. "You're okay?" "Yes." He stepped forward, thinking about the visit he had made the day before to put flowers on Duncan's grave and feeling grateful that the green snake had not put in a show for him then. He moved, trying to forget the snake, off in the direction of Duncan's grave. As they arrived at the spot, rays of sunshine illuminated the area through the trees, and Belinda stood by the wood-bordered grave and let her eyes fill with tears for the boy she had loved, as only couples who fit together like a key and a lock are able to love. The time they'd known each other had been so good. They met at a university meeting about marine pollution. It had seemed as if each of them had spent the rest of their lives waiting for the other. And when he saw her back to her flat and they had talked about the mystery of DNA, it had seemed as romantic as the moon or violins might have been to other couples. Their argument about evolution or intelligent design had started that night, and it had been the only thing that they ever disagreed about ongoingly. From the first week of dating, neither could imagine any plans that excluded the other, and Duncan used to say that though he didn't believe in fate, their meeting was a very good argument for it. She used to tease him that he would be the only scientist in the Royal Society that filled his lecture with superstitious speculations. And now her soulmate was buried under the ground, as lifeless as the dead wood laying near him. Gus stood beside her, but he remained silent. He was not sure what to say or how to continue. He felt it best to let her grieve here and accept more fully Duncan's demise. Belinda fell to her knees beside the shallow grave, and Gus thought she might be praying. He was right. She was asking for help to understand why. Where is Duncan? Will we ever be together again? Is this it? A young life cut down like a sapling tree before the power of its youth has been allowed to produce either offspring or work. As more questions, more uncertainty spread through the girl's mind, her heart seemed to root at the spot, this place in the hidden forest where all her dreams had been laid to rest. Gus stood as still as any undertaker would in these circumstances, and it was true that, like any undertaker, he was well used to death. But he still felt heavily in his own heart the pitiful sorrow of the young life before him. His mind fell backward to that night when the RAF had turned the city of Dresden into a fireball. There were 135,000 deaths, it is thought, that night, and 134,999 of them were a loss to the nation. One, though, was a special loss to him from which he had never recovered. When Magdalena Schmidt fried in a nurse's uniform that night, half of Gustav Mitzer's life was burned away with her. Of course, war was war, and the Luftwaffe had rained down bombs on British cities. Gus himself had hands that weren't free from bloodshed, but even so, that one death had hurt his heart more than anything else in that dreadful war. Now, as he thought about his one and only true love, he looked back at the hopeless face bent at the grave, and this in peace, he thought. Her hopes destroyed by an aircraft too, but not in war, in peace. A bird flew across the grave, a small blaze of crimson, and settled on a branch. Belle, even in her grief, took note of it as it snapped a fly from the air. It seemed like a blackbird in size, but as a flycatcher in habits. She couldn't see it very clearly, but as it darted out of the tree to take another insect and then returned to its perch, she knew it was indeed of the flycatcher family. Gus didn't notice, though he must have heard its call. The forest would not hold any silence over a grave, but the humans had been in silent mode for at least 10 minutes. It was Belle who pushed her hair back from her face, and looking from the bird to the grave and then back to the bird, said, "The night before we left, we sat with a book, Amazonian Birds, looking at pictures and trying to get a few common birds fixed in our head. That bird may be a vermilion flycatcher. If it is not where I would have expected to find it unless there is water nearby." Gus was interested in that. "I think," she continued, "that it lives near the edge of forests or on scrubby land and by water." "You mean we could be near such an area?" "Well, it may not be a vermilion flycatcher, but if it is, I don't really know, I'm just guessing. If only I had that book." The bird flew away in the opposite direction of their path home. "Do you think we should explore in that direction, Gus?" "Yes, I think we should." "Before we do, Gus, did you place those flowers there?" "Yes, I came yesterday and left them." "Thank you, I really appreciate that." Belle took Gus by the arm. She then kissed his cheek. "I wish Duncan had lived to know you, Gus." "Well, Belle, we will come together here whenever you wish it." "Thanks, Gus. Shall we see where the flight of that bird takes us?" The forest, of course, was dense, and they had to hack their way through some of it. Gus was afraid of more snakes, and Belle was looking at every plant and insect. Most bird cries were from above, high up in the tree canopy, but the taller trees were fewer here. They forced their way on, and after 2 hours and more of fighting their way through and avoiding the bushes that seemed too thick, at last they came into a clearing. As they did, a mammal of cat-like shape and fox-like size slinked into the forest to the right of the clearing. Here there were scattered bushes, and in the area 100 feet away was a lake, or at least a large pond. Edging this, Belle and Gus walked around it to the other side and followed a stream so shallow they were able to walk in it. But suddenly, without warning, it became deeper, and Gus nearly disappeared from sight with a loud splash. Belle helped him up, and a few more paces along the bank amid the bushes, and they were at a river. Belle compared it to the Salisbury Avon and guessed it was at least 10 times wider. The river seemed to bend back to what seemed like the direction of their camp, and they both agreed there must be a river bank nearer to their camp and upstream a little. Retracing their steps back, past the pond and into the forest, they realised that the very little of the sunlight ever reached this place, and it took time for their eyes to readjust to the gloom as they returned to the area nearer to Duncan's grave. Of course, the return journey was easier because the way was clearer. What had seemed like miles and miles was reduced to not so many hundreds of yards, and they were soon back at the poor young Scott's grave. In the trees above them there was a new noise, and Belle spotted a troop of unusual monkeys which she had not seen before. She couldn't see them very clearly. It seemed to be a kind of spider monkey, but it seemed to be of a lighter colour than any she'd previously looked at on film or photographs. Gus was pleased that she'd spotted this around Duncan's grave, this giving her more than a sad reason to remember this place. He was more concerned about what they could eat and what they couldn't, but if watching the wildlife kept Belle sane, that was fine. As they made their way back to the camp, Gus noticed that the damper areas were wetter, and the stream that had been only a trickle spread over a wide patch was now a steady stream of some 7 to 8 centimetres and half a metre wide. He sensed somewhere that he would have to think seriously about finding even higher ground if Belle and he were to avoid the danger of flooding. He was trying now to get some kind of mental map of the area, to see where they should move to, and at the same time he knew that the further away they moved from the crash site, the less likely it was that a rescue party or anyone else would be able to find them. That's episode 11, my friends. Thank you for sticking with the story, and I'll be posting episode 12 soon. Bye.